Hey, this is Waylon Lewis with Elephant Journal, and I'm honored to be here with my new friend Marlo Fiskin. Marlo has made the news lately because of you wrote something very, I don't know, I feel like saying brave and vulnerable, but I think in the Brene Brown area we say those words all day long. But brave and vulnerable piece in Medium, so thank you for that. And then New York Times picked that up and it was a big story around Jeffrey Epstein. So, Marlo, you're a dancer?
I am a dancer.
And what else?
Well, I've been dancing for 30 years and teaching movement full-time for 18 years. So I travel all over the globe pretty much full-time teaching people to love moving.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you just teach dancers or you teach the public?
No, I particularly love working with adults who didn't come from dance backgrounds and showing them that it is something that they can experience like right here, right now, if they get in the right mindset.
Yeah.
So this is for a lot of people, they kind of remove themselves from dance. Like, I can't dance because of all these reasons. And if you just pay attention to the right things, that moment, you can.
Like, I'm shy about dancing, or I'm not fit enough, or whatever.
Yeah. So there's just some present moment awareness tools that we can use in order to have a dance experience, which is something that all humans share and should be able to access.
Love that. We need to get you to write about that.
Happily.
So maybe leaving behind that fun, joyful conversation, let's talk about one of the biggest beeps of our generation, Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
And your mercifully brief interaction with his world. Maybe could you just sum up a little bit your story and what you wrote about?
Yeah, when I was 21, new to New York City, a friend of a friend at a bar said, I now know somebody needs a personal trainer. And
a woman.
Yeah, it was exactly a woman who said, I have a wealthy friend who needs a personal trainer, and didn't really play up anything about who he actually was, and said, give me your phone number, we'll set up a meeting. So I go to his house, have a very peculiar interview.
And he just had a little apartment, right?
Right. It was actually the largest private residence in all of Manhattan, which was a single doorbell for a 9-story building. And, I'm 21 years old, I've never even been on the Upper East Side, and it's like, it truly felt like I had been transported to a different world.
Right.
So I come back for several sessions with him, which were all relatively odd, but his requests got increasingly sexual, trying to push my boundaries or see what I was willing to do. And they sent me to go train some of his girls, which were some of the young models that he was bringing into the country and housing. And I really couldn't put all these pieces together about who I was actually meeting and what was truly going on until news broke about the story approximately 10 years after. So I met a number of the people that have been revealed as like his recruiters for the women, like his managers, the butler, and their role in it. And they are all people that I dealt with, but
you had that right-hand woman, I forget her name. I don't know if you interacted with her.
Yeah, I dealt with somebody else, Sarah Killen. Okay. But it was I was brought in allegedly to be his trainer, but really it's kind of just an audition to see what you're willing to do. And luckily at 21 I was too old and was establishing boundaries, and then they just don't ask you to come back. So it was probably 8 times total that I worked with him. Yeah.
So there's a lot there, obviously, but you do write in Medium quite movingly or powerfully for me as the reader, and I don't think they discussed it in New York Times, that half the reason you kind of got out unscathed, half of it was because of your own boundaries and your own empowerment and strength, and I want to talk about how we can learn from that. But half was because you weren't this 17-year-old rail-thin model type. He liked children, or 14-year-old, or whatever it is.
Essentially. I mean, based on the women or girls that I saw, they were very slim, like runway model types. And when I started to not be willing or really taking up his requests without hesitation, he started to be insulting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, and say things, oh, well, if you're a dancer, why are you overweight?
Yeah.
You know, and it was, now I can recognize what was going on far more, but it was all so strange at the time that I was shocked, stunned. Like,
Yeah.
I'm being, you know, I was hired to be a personal trainer. I'm trying to do my job, and then this man is insulting me. And
he seemed
very
totally
confusing.
uninterested in actually stretching or working
No,
out.
no.
Like, it's
It
not
was
what
so
it was
odd.
about.
Yeah,
It was just
He
bald.
wanted to be on the phone a lot, and then
Yeah.
he would ask me to massage him while he was on the phone. So, but he never really said anything. So I don't
know.
know if it was fake.
Yeah.
You know, all
Yeah.
part of.
I know that write-up was so fascinating because he would just be like,
The classic.
yeah,
Pretending to be on the phone. I don't know. Maybe it was, but
weird. Yeah, he probably was like, Butler, call me, and then pretend to talk about numbers. Because they also are questioning his whole business acumen and how he accumulated that money. Anyway, that's another story. But so then I did want to bring that up because there is this level of it's almost fortunate that you weren't directly in his target. Beep beep beep.
yeah.
And there's some level because I've had some. Many of us have had near misses in life where I felt like there was something lucky that happened that I.
You know, he never like found a way to like promise me or like lure me in with something that I really wanted, and that is what he did with other girls. Like I'm a scout for Victoria's Secret. That's what he would say to some of the
Right.
others, you know. So
Right.
could I have been manipulated if there was something that was like more directly in line with something he knew I wanted? Like quite possibly.
Right, get you, and then
I have,
don't know,
like-
some dance.
Exactly. Like I have a connection
Yeah.
to this. You want to be in, you know, and
Well, and he did that directly. If you read some of those other stories,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure you
Oh,
have.
yeah.
He ruined the careers of some of these
Absolutely.
young dancer women.
And I encountered plenty of other people that do that, not at his profile, but exactly, they know what you want, and they offer it to see how far it'll go. And that didn't happen with him and I guess maybe he thought I just really wanted to be a personal trainer.
Well, you had a sense of, I mean, you talk about that you went into that situation guessing, knowing that it was going to be, something was going to be weird or off at the very least, and just being like, I want to
Right.
see this weird world.
Yeah, as I said, the medium thing, like I'll take up some things that seem like bad ideas, but it would probably make for a good story later in life. You
Yeah.
know? And that seems like kind of a defining trait of early 20s for a lot
Yeah.
of people. Like,
Yeah.
if you
It's
ask
New
me,
York.
is this a great idea? You're like, probably not, but
Yeah.
interesting.
But you still somehow went into that situation, not just like lamb to the slaughter, but you had some sense of gravitas or being grounded in yourself or being able to say no and ultimately leaving that situation. So let's talk about that a bit. And I know that gets really complicated, but obviously the purpose for this is not just to tell some fun story over at a bar and like, you know, I connected with this guy in the news, Jeffrey Epstein, the biggest predator of, well, one of them. But the point is, how can this help others? So I guess I'll just ask that question to you, like, you know, if you can counsel your peers and your students and the public out there, how do we, what can we learn from this, from the whole situation in your mind? And you've been through other situations.
Oh yeah. Well, in the territory of being a dancer or a model, it's very likely that every young dancer and model is going to have several of people come into their life where their intentions are to manipulate them or harm them or just see how far they can go. And we're not really educating the younger people that are coming into these industries, but just people in general, to be able to identify how you are really feeling. Are you feeling safe right now, and being able to sense it and go with your instincts. If you feel like this is unsafe, I should end this, even if there's something that's been promised to you. Because that's what happens, is we let the promise of what you're going to get override all these feelings you have of like, this situation isn't good. And you're holding on to that promise and then feeling into what you know isn't right.
Well, and also the whole thing around predators and Me Too is that there's a technique to it. Like there's like David Schwimmer, did you see his series? The Friends guy did all this series of commercials around sexual assault, and they all started with like, seemingly innocent little steps, like accidentally touching, whispering something in the person's ear, and then it went from there. So, being able to, at those little points where something's a little off but not grossly objectionable, being able to how do you listen to yourself in those situations? Because Epstein was certainly doing some of that.
Yeah.
Where it was like sketchy, or he asked you to sit on his hamstrings, right? And you're like, well, it's weird, but it's not...
Right. It's weird, but it's not like a hard,
sexual.
absolutely no.
It's not awful.
Yeah. I mean, it's for other people.
How do we honor those little moments instead of skipping over them and saying... Because we have this default to being like, oh, I'm sure it's fine and innocent.
Yeah. Well, that is being able to identify it, and then do I need to vocalize this as a boundary? And that's something that we're unfortunately not learning to discuss until usually after a number of bad things have happened. Like now I'm seeing a lot of discussion about it, but I'm 36. It could be something that is introduced to young people in the context of just socialization and play that would be great preparation for later in life.
Yeah.
Pretty much we learn everything we need to learn through play, but we're not learning how to express our discomfort or either discomfort or establish boundaries in situations when we're young, and so then we really struggle to do it later on, because these are all power dynamics which are part of the way that we play when we're young. We test them.
And being willing to listen to your intuition or your kind of spidey sense, like it goes, and you're like, should I listen to that or should I relax?
Right. Listen, and then do I say something? Do I change how I'm being? Or do I leave? And being able to recognize like what your choices are, and then feel empowered to do them, even if you've been promised something that you really want. Because I think that for dancers, models, actresses, like that's the promise of this great dream that really people will get themselves into situations that they feel really bad about for a long time leading up to the incident that finally is too much.
Yeah. No, it's funny. It just took me back to, I don't even know how to talk about it, but like to my first love was a ballerina. And I remember we had one conversation, we were kids, like 16 or 15, saying, her love for ballet. And she would just like, she said openly to me, she would like, I'll do whatever I need to like, because the society is this way and they're going to do this kind of stuff to me and others. And I don't really care about that. So I'll just, and I remember at the time, obviously being like, kind of troubled by that.
Yeah.
So how can we undo that culture? And I love you're talking about play. Like it's almost like the David Schwimmer. He has these little skits where he shows different kind of sexual assaults in progress, basically. Like the boss puts his hand on the knee or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's like we need to have, I keep thinking of Sesame Street, like we need to have these kind of lessons in front of us in school learning. We
don't do a lot of real life preparation, in education, but and play is something that's largely removed, but it really is a preparation for how we deal with one another in romantic situations, dangerous situations. And I mean, a big part of my work is getting adults to remember how to play and all of the different ways that play can be experienced. And it's not always joyful and playful per se, just being really tuned into what you're feeling in a situation and honoring what you're feeling. So
like it can be scary or uncomfortable or awkward or
right. Well, we experience things that are scary, uncomfortable, and awkward that are good for us. And if we're always running from those things, then you have a different set of problems. So there's, thank you. There's scary.
That's like all of Elephant's thesis right there.
Scary, uncomfortable, and awkward, and then being able to make the judgment call. And this is not going to serve me. Next step, get out, change how you're being, or establish a boundary and see how the other person responds to it.
And, it's not always some, headline making monster like Jeffrey Epstein. It could be a friend, it could be a colleague, it could be a boss, it could be a student, and it could be super gray area. Like you could be at a bar and they're talking with you and they put their hand on your arm and maybe they're just enthusiastic and they're talking about something, but maybe you like get a weird vibe from it and you're like
hey, enough with the pouting.
Yeah, so how would you say that? When it's gray area, you're not going to be like, you are sexually assaulting me.
Yeah.
But that it could be where that could be the intent or not, and you don't always know, and that's why people don't say anything, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to offend or.
Well, for many people, it's harder to lay down boundaries when you're actually closer to someone,
Right.
because like there's it's more complex. If it is someone that is a casual conversation, be like, I'd enjoy this conversation a lot more if you weren't patting my arm, or like, I'd be able to focus on what you're saying if you weren't doing this. Thank you.
That's simple.
Yeah, that's
And it doesn't end the conversation.
yeah.
I think that's
Let's
like
air pat.
yeah.
I like to turn everything into a game, so I might
Patty
try
cake.
that. Hey, do you want to do this?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the Buddha talked a lot about not too tight, not too loose. So you don't have to be like, I'm calling the cops.
Right.
You're doing X to me. You can be like, do you think you need to be doing that to talk about your enthusiasm about tonight's Democratic debate that everyone should be watching? Something like that.
Yeah.
It can be in the middle is
with
the point. The middle way.
The quick to draw the red flag, that's also not maybe a present moment reaction. That
Right,
is
right.
like maybe being influenced by traumas, prior life, the media, and like all these other influences changing how people react to something that's really going on. So
Yeah.
both freezing and freaking out or escalating a situation, we just need practice doing
Yeah.
these things in order to know what the right path is, and we don't have practice.
So everyone go home or to school or whatever and practice with a friend who you trust,
Yeah.
laying down awkward, just vocalizing anytime you feel like there's an awkward gray area going on.
There are many resources for those type of experiences, but again, they're presented to adults.
Yeah. And people who already are interested and know they need that practice.
Right.
Like part of the goal of mentorship in human society is to learn from our elders.
Yes.
To learn from people who've been there before. Even if our elders are still rocking and rolling.
That's right.
Not elderly. So can we touch on that one other situation too? With the photographer?
Yeah.
Because that was really powerful for me to read, because obviously I read the Medium piece, I read New York Times, I read whatever. I'm like, wow, you're like a kick-ass, powerful, comfortable to vocalize. And then I read that other experience, and we don't have to go in depth or anything, but just you kind of went down this slippery slope with this photographer into a very 3-second situation you weren't comfortable with, and then that was sort of exploited.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, the short story of that was
Yeah.
a photographer that I worked with, and we were shooting outdoor, and the sun was going way down. I was in water, and he was encouraging me to wear less. And I've done a number of nude sculpture-esque body shoots, and it's really hard to tell what images are going to look like until after, because sometimes it's you are seeing the glimmer of shadow, and it's beautiful, but I felt I don't know about this. It was 3 minutes where I was nude in the water, and then but he really illuminated it in a way that was too much. He showed me the
Like with flash or something.
yeah, it was bright. It wasn't
subtle.
it wasn't how I want to be represented.
Right.
Yeah. And which is okay, because I get the proofs, and I can say I don't like these. I said I don't like these. These are uncomfortable. Please delete them. Make them go away forever. I don't.
You said that.
I did. I don't feel good about these. But
There's
he ended
that clarity we love.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I was uncomfortable, but again.
But at that point, he owns those photos.
Well, not.
Legally.
I'm not too clear.
Well, there's
in
a gray
that,
area
right?
there.
But
He has the
He
control.
agreed. He said, "Oh yes, of course, I'll delete them." But he ended up then showing those particular images to other women that I know to convince them to go much further. So
Yeah, Marlo did this work with me.
right, it was
You
the
should do
bait
it.
to get
Yeah.
to get them in, and then ask them to try to go further. So, it's also in these dance situations, some of the behind the scenes, from the outside, you have no idea what the end result is going to look like. Is this very overtly sexual, or is this there's flashing lights, and there's legs, and there's hair, and same thing with the photography. So it's not until I see it that I really know. And I expressed my boundaries. He violated them, but he did far worse to many other people. So I hate that I have been the one to speak up on these issues, and it almost appears wow, this lady keeps attracting these things. But the reality is 30 years of dance Like there's far more, and everybody I know who's been in this industry has plenty of these stories. They write to me and say, tell me their stories that are far worse than the things that I am speaking up about. People are thanking me because they've felt either ashamed to or scared, like they have families, their job, their image somehow. They're worried that if they speak up about it, that it will harm them now. So, I'm certainly not excited about having these situations associated with me, but it appears that discussing them is making a difference for people who went through it, and that these stories could prevent it from happening in the future if people have heard them.
Well, I thank you. And I think, it's readily apparent that you're not doing it out of any, the intention's always kind of obvious. You can smell a situation, and you're doing it out of, I was going to ask this, but you just answered it, out of example or service, not out of enjoying the drama or the being associated with Jeffrey Epstein or something. Yeah. No, and I think it is helpful, and that's how we're going to change a generation. That hopefully we'll have kindergartners, play acting a situation. And I think, a lot of the fear, I was talking about how two of the New York Times journalists, both women who reported on the Harvey Weinstein situation, it took 10 years of investment and investigation into that under legal and other crazy threats that Harvey Weinstein came up with. So there's a lot of bravery and uncomfortableness coming forward. And one thing they talked about was really using truth and corroboration, and not just, I think social media has leveled the playing field a bit. Anyone can expose Terry Richardson or Jeffrey Epstein or whomever for the first time, which is fantastic. It's not like the powerful and the rich are up here anymore. But at the same time, we have to all operate with truth as the basis. And we try to do journalistic ethics around here. So I think that is where you're coming from, and I think it's super helpful for people to hear. So do you have any advice for young women and men out there just generally who are going to college or drinking or walking home, all of that, because it's a controversial issue? How do we talk about this in a way that is helpful, that doesn't assign some of the responsibility or let alone the blame to would-be victims?
The drinking part kind of throws me off. It's hard to give advice that people will then retain when they're they're inebriated. But that doesn't mean that.
Yeah, well, I just speaking personally, we all have many friends who have been raped or sexually assaulted. Boulder, Colorado is one of the happiest cities in the whole world. It gets that award all the time, and yet we have tons of rape that happens here, a lot. It's a college town. So it is an ongoing issue. And as we know, most rape doesn't occur when you're walking home drunk. It happens from a friend, Just a small question.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I'd have to think about it, because a lot of the situations, if people willingly step into them initially, going, even if you're with somebody that it's still having had some practice sensing what's going on and being able to establish a boundary. It's certainly not always possible, and there's a lot of freezing that happens when people start to feel like they're in danger, and that's the place where advice can't override some of these mechanisms that we have that will cause us to freeze when we start to sense that something is wrong, that then you can't establish boundary, you can't get out of there, and so that's
so it's hard enough when you're sober.
It's hard enough when you're sober. But
well, I think that's a good honest answer or non-answer.
Well, I think sometimes people forget, because I see comments when people speak up about assault situations, why didn't you just leave, why didn't you say something? And that is revealing just a lack of understanding about fight, flight, freeze. And
well, that's what they train in self-defense, when you freeze, to somehow get through that.
Right, but people
you have to
don't
practice
have training with
Right,
that. 'Cause-
exactly. But again,
Yeah.
going back to the Sesame Street kindergarten thing, like we need to train self-defense so that we can get through that freezing, perhaps.
No,
I don't know.
that's like defensive reacting. You know, not even necessarily like needing to get out of a situation of restraint, but it's one, having examples and conversations that prepare them for the things that could happen. Like when you know that there's a possibility of something, it does start to prepare you and empower you with how you would react. Even the imaginary scenario or being presented with the story can you remember, like, oh well, this person reacted this way. So the conversations about it they weren't happening even like that much when I was in college. So it's happening more.
Yeah.
I think it's also important for men, women, all humans to discuss them together rather than it just being like women talking together. How can we stay safe? It needs to be an integrated conversation of like what boundaries and what makes people feel good and not, and also understanding how different we all are with what we're okay with and what we're not okay with. So,
well, and as we've seen with the Catholic Church, it obviously happens to young boys. You know, it's a societal sickness.
Yeah.
And talking about it as a society is probably the best way forward. So, well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm so appreciative, especially since you're talking about probably not the first thing you'd like to talk about, which might be dance or the present moment. You're talking about like the 8 millionth thing you'd prefer to talk about. But it is of service, I hope, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you for having me here, neighbor.
Yeah, no, we just discovered it. I'm like reading the New York Times. It took the New York Times to
realize that we're neighbors.
yeah, exactly. Well, Marla
Thank you.
Fiskin, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.